Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. The day I first noticed her, it was raining. Not the kind of rain that drizzles softly, but a heavy downpour that turned the city streets into a blur of headlights and wet reflections. I was sitting in my usual spot in the cafe across the street from the salon. The smell of coffee was strong, and my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the usual mundane worries. Then, in the middle of all that, she appeared. Ella. She was laughing with a client, wiping her hands on a towel, completely oblivious to the storm outside. I remember the way her hair shone under the bright lights of the salon, the easy grace in the way she moved. There was something captivating about her, something magnetic that drew my gaze every time I passed by. At first, it was just casual curiosity. I'd watch her from time to time, especially after work, when I'd stop by the cafe for a coffee before heading home. But as the days passed, I started to notice things. The way she lingered with certain clients, the too friendly hugs she'd give them as they left, her hand resting a little too long on their shoulders. There was a certain charm about her, a way she commanded attention, especially from the men. It wasn't overt, subtle enough to make you second-guess yourself, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. One evening, as I left the cafe, I ran into Nick, my friend from work, just as he was exiting the salon. "Hey, Nick," I said, stepping in line with him as we walked toward the subway. "Hey, man," he replied, a little too quickly. His eyes darted to the side, and I noticed he had that nervous energy about him. The same kind of energy people have when they're hiding something. "You've been going there a lot lately," I said casually, jerking my thumb toward the salon. He shrugged, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, Ella's great. She's, really good at what she does." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "Really? What's so special about her?" Nick hesitated, looking away. "I dunno, man. She's just different." There it was again, that evasiveness. He had never been the best at keeping secrets, but whatever he was hiding now, it was making him uncomfortable. "Different how?" Nick glanced over at me, then quickly shook his head. "Forget it. I gotta go. Catch you later, alright?" He walked off before I could ask any more questions, leaving me standing there in the rain, watching him disappear into the crowd. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew Nick was lying about something. And whatever it was, it had to do with Ella. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. I started thinking about the other clients, the way they'd linger after hours. Why did they seem so enthralled by her? I decided then that I needed to know for sure. The next few days were a blur of observations, each one confirming my suspicions. Ella had a routine, one that revolved around more than just haircuts and beauty treatments. Certain clients, the regulars, the ones who paid cash and stayed after hours, always left with a certain look in their eyes. Satisfied, dazed, like they had received something more than they had paid for. It all came to a head on a Friday evening. The salon was closing, and I was across the street again, sitting in my usual spot with a half-empty cup of coffee. The streetlights flickered on as the last of the daylight disappeared, casting long shadows on the pavement. I watched as the final client left the salon, a woman with freshly styled hair, and then, nothing. The lights inside the salon remained on, but the blinds had been drawn halfway. That's when I saw him. The tall, athletic man, a regular client. He walked up to the door and knocked softly. Ella opened it almost immediately, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen before. I slid out of the cafe and crossed the street, moving quietly so they wouldn't notice me. I crouched low by the window, my pulse racing as I peered through the small gap in the blinds. What I saw turned my stomach. Ella was standing close to the man, her body pressed against his. Her hands were on his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. They were talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then, without warning, she leaned in and kissed him. Not the kind of kiss you give a friend, but something more intimate. Something wrong. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a surge of anger rising up inside me. I watched as they moved deeper into the salon, disappearing behind one of the partitions. That was all I needed to see. I stood up, my hands trembling with fury. I felt like a fool, like I had been duped by the perfect facade she put on for the world. All this time, I had been watching her, admiring her, thinking there was something special about her. But she wasn't special. She was manipulative, deceitful, and worst of all, she was playing these men for fools. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. You shouldn't be here. I whipped around to find Ella standing at the door of the salon, her eyes locked onto mine. There was no smile now, no charm. Just cold, calculating eyes. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. Just what? Spying. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the street. She stepped closer, her arms crossed over her chest. What do you think you're doing? I know what you're doing in there, I shot back, the words coming out harsher than I intended. You're taking advantage of those men. Her expression didn't falter. She tilted her head slightly, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Is that what you think? I saw you. Don't try to deny it. Ella sighed, shaking her head. You don't know anything about me. You think you've got it all figured out, but you have no idea what's really going on. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. She was right about one thing, I didn't know her. Not really. But I knew enough to see that she was up to something, something that wasn't right. I'm going to expose you, I said, my voice low but firm. You're not going to get away with this. Ella's eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. We'll see about that, she said quietly, before turning and disappearing back into the salon, the door clicking shut behind her. As I walked away, the anger still simmering in my chest, I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sun had barely risen when I walked into Lisa's office the next morning. Her workspace was sleek and modern, a testament to her successful career in PR. As always, her desk was meticulously organized, with neatly stacked papers and a fresh pot of coffee. The smell of it hit me as I walked in, giving me a small, ironic comfort. I needed that comfort because I was about to dive into something messy and vindictive. Lisa looked up from her computer, her eyebrows raised in mild surprise. You're here early. What's up, Ella? I said, dropping into a chair across from her. I need your help. Lisa's curiosity piqued as she took a sip from her coffee cup. Ella? From the salon. The very same, I replied, leaning forward. I've discovered some things about her, things that aren't exactly ethical. And I want to do something about it. She set her coffee down and folded her arms. All right, start from the beginning. What exactly have you found? I recounted everything I had seen and learned. As I spoke, Lisa's expression shifted from interest to concern to disbelief. When I finished, she sat back, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. So, let me get this straight, she said slowly. You want to ruin her career because you think she's taking advantage of her clients. It's not just a suspicion, I argued. I saw her with my own eyes. It's manipulative and deceitful, and it needs to be exposed. Lisa sighed, her fingers drumming on her desk. This is going to be a delicate operation. If we're going to take her down, we need concrete evidence and a well-thought-out strategy. I've got that covered, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I've already contacted Paul. He's a private investigator, and he's agreed to help us. Lisa nodded, her expression softening a bit. All right, that's a start. But we'll need more than just his observations. We need testimonies, concrete proof, and a media plan that's airtight. Exactly, I said, relieved she was on board. What's our first step? Lisa leaned forward, pulling out a notepad and pen. First, let's outline our action plan. Paul will need to gather as much evidence as possible, photos, witness statements, anything that can corroborate your claims. Meanwhile, I'll start drafting a media strategy. We'll need to control the narrative, make sure it's presented in a way that's both compelling and irrefutable. What about the legal side of things? I asked. I don't want to end up in trouble for this. Lisa gave me a reassuring smile. We'll be cautious. We're only exposing the truth. As long as we stick to the facts and avoid defamation, we should be fine. I'll also consult with a legal expert to make sure we're on solid ground. Sounds good, I said, feeling a little more at ease. When can we get started? Lisa glanced at her calendar. I'll set up a meeting with Paul for this afternoon. In the meantime, gather any additional information you might have. Former clients' names, dates, anything relevant. We'll need it. Got it, I said, standing up. Thanks, Lisa. I really appreciate your help with this. Lisa gave a nod. Just remember, this isn't just about revenge. It's about accountability. Make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. As I left Lisa's office, I called Paul, arranging to meet him later in the day. When I arrived at his office, a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, he was already waiting. Paul was a seasoned private investigator with a no-nonsense attitude. His office was cluttered with files and old case notes, a testament to his years of work. Hey, Paul, I said, stepping into the dimly lit room. Hey, he replied, looking up from his desk. What's the situation? I filled him in on the details, just as I had with Lisa. Paul listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. All right, here's the plan, Paul said, his voice steady. I'll start by tailing Ella, see who she meets with and when. I'll also dig into her background, any previous issues, personal connections that might shed light on her behavior. I'll need you to help with contacting former clients if you can. I'll get on that, I said. And Lisa's working on the media strategy. We'll coordinate everything through her. Sounds like a solid plan, Paul said, standing up and extending his hand. I'll get started right away. I'll need a couple of days to gather evidence, but I'll keep you updated on any developments. Thanks, Paul, I said, shaking his hand. I appreciate your help. As I walked out of Paul's office, I felt a mix of anticipation and unease. We were setting something in motion that couldn't be undone, and while I was driven by a sense of justice, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Was I doing the right thing? Or was I letting my anger and sense of betrayal cloud my judgment? There was no turning back now. The pieces were in place, and all we had to do was see it through. I hoped that by the end of it, the truth would come out and justice would be served. But deep down, I knew that the road ahead would be far from straightforward. The week following our action plan was a whirlwind of activity. Paul worked tirelessly to gather evidence, and Lisa began to shape our media strategy. The weight of the task ahead loomed over me, mingling with a mixture of anticipation and unease. Paul kept me updated with daily texts and occasional phone calls. I was eager to hear any news, but each update came with its own weight of complexity and ethical ambiguity. One afternoon, I met Paul at a small diner near his office. He slid into the booth across from me, his face set in a determined expression. Got some updates for you, Paul said, pulling out a manila folder from his briefcase. He slid it across the table, and I opened it to reveal a series of photographs. They were taken through a discreet lens, showing Ella in various compromising situations with different male clients. Damn, I muttered, flipping through the images. This is more than I expected. Paul nodded, his face serious. These shots are from several weeks. I've been tracking her movements, documenting interactions. The pattern is clear. She's been engaging in inappropriate behavior with multiple clients. I frowned, my stomach churning. And what about witness statements? I've spoken to a few former clients, Paul continued. They were reluctant at first, but I managed to get them to talk. Their testimonies back up what you saw and what these photos show. It's not just about the behavior, it's about the pattern of manipulation. Good, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What's next? Paul leaned in, his eyes focused. We need to make sure this is airtight before we go public. I'm working on getting a couple of more solid testimonies. Once we have everything, we'll pass it on to Rachel. She's the journalist, right? Yes, I confirmed. She's already briefed and ready to go. Later that day, I met Lisa at her office to discuss our media strategy. Her workspace was now filled with drafts, media contacts, and strategic plans. She looked up as I walked in, her expression one of focused determination. Hey, Lisa said, closing her laptop. How's the evidence gathering going? Paul's done a great job, I replied, sitting down. We've got solid evidence and some compelling testimonies. It's all ready to be handed over to Rachel. Lisa nodded, her eyes scanning her notes. Perfect. I've been working on the media strategy. We need to create a narrative that's both compelling and unassailable. This isn't just about reporting facts, it's about framing the story in a way that ensures it gets the attention it deserves. Any ideas? I asked. Lisa tapped her pen against her desk. We'll start with a strong lead, something that grabs attention immediately. We'll focus on the unethical behavior and the pattern of exploitation. We need to make sure the media portrays Ella as the manipulative predator she is, not just someone caught in a scandal. All right, I said. What's the plan for releasing the information? We'll coordinate with Rachel on timing, Lisa explained. We'll make sure the story is picked up by major news outlets and that it's shared widely on social media. We need to control the message and prevent any spin that could undermine the story. Sounds like a solid plan, I agreed, feeling a surge of grim satisfaction. With everything set in motion, the next step was to meet with Rachel, the journalist who would bring Ella's story to the public. Rachel's office was sleek and modern, filled with the hum of news reporters and the clatter of keyboards. I walked in, feeling a mix of apprehension and resolve. Rachel was seated at her desk, surrounded by a sea of papers and half-empty coffee cups. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and professionalism. Hi, Rachel said, standing to shake my hand. I've heard a lot about this story. You've got something substantial, I hear. I nodded, handing over the manila folder Paul had prepared. Everything you need is in there, photos, testimonies, and all the evidence Paul has gathered. Lisa has already worked on the media strategy. We're ready to go. Rachel took the folder, flipping through the contents with a practiced eye. This is impressive, she said, her tone indicating her approval. It's clear there's a pattern here. I'll start drafting the article and ensure it's comprehensive and compelling. Thanks, Rachel, I said, feeling a weight lift slightly off my shoulders. We just need to make sure it gets the attention it deserves. I'll make sure of that, Rachel replied confidently. We'll coordinate on the timing and make sure it hits at the right moment. The following week, the article Rachel wrote was published. Titled, Behind the Salon's Glass Walls, The Secret Life of Ella St. James, it was an exposé that left no stone unturned. The article detailed Ella's manipulative behavior, using the evidence we had provided, photos, testimonies, and a thorough investigation into her unethical practices. As the article went live, the response was immediate and explosive. Social media exploded with shares and comments, local news outlets picked up the story, and Ella's name became synonymous with scandal. The salon's phone lines were flooded with inquiries, clients canceled appointments, and her reputation was in tatters. I watched from a distance, feeling a cold satisfaction. The truth was out, and Ella's career was effectively over. But as the days passed and the initial shock began to wear off, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. The damage was done, but the personal ramifications were still to come. As I prepared for the inevitable fallout, I wondered if the sense of justice I had fought for was worth the collateral damage. The next chapter of this story would bring me face to face with Ella again, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But for now, the truth was out, and the world was watching. The days following the publication of the article were chaotic. Ella's career imploded almost immediately. The salon was inundated with calls, clients canceled their appointments, and the media descended like vultures. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling a mixture of grim satisfaction and an unsettling sense of foreboding. As the dust began to settle, I knew it was time to confront Ella. I needed to hear it from her, to face her and understand the full scope of what was happening. I called her office and scheduled an appointment, knowing that I might be walking into a storm of emotions and recriminations. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the salon just as it was closing. The once bustling place now looked desolate and abandoned, a stark contrast to the vibrant, bustling environment it had once been. Ella was waiting for me in her small, dimly lit office, the walls lined with mirrors and a few personal touches that once made the place feel warm and welcoming. Now, it felt cold and sterile. Ella was sitting behind her desk, her hands clasped together. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red, as though she hadn't slept in days. When I walked in, she looked up, her expression a mix of resignation and wariness. "Sit down," she said quietly, gesturing to the chair opposite her. I sat, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Ella, I just wanted to," she cut me off, her voice strained. "I know why you're here. You want to gloat, to tell me how I got what I deserved." "No, that's not why I'm here," I said, struggling to keep my tone calm. "I want to understand. Why did you do it? Why did you deceive so many people?" Ella looked away, staring at a spot on the floor. "You don't understand what it's like. I was desperate. The money, the attention, it was all so easy to get caught up in." I leaned forward, my anger simmering just below the surface. "But it wasn't just about money, was it? You were manipulating people. Taking advantage of their trust." Ella's shoulders slumped, and she sighed deeply. "I know. I was selfish. I wanted more, and I didn't care who I hurt to get it. I thought I could control it, but it spiraled out of control." There was a long silence between us. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it was too late for apologies. The damage was done, and her career was in ruins. "So what now?" I asked finally. "What are you going to do?" Ella shook her head, looking lost. "I don't know. I've lost everything. My career, my reputation. I feel like I've ruined my life beyond repair." "I'm sorry for what happened," I said, though it felt hollow. "But you need to take responsibility for your actions." Ella nodded, her expression somber. "I understand. I just hope I can find a way to make amends, to rebuild my life somehow." As the conversation wound down, there was a knock on the office door. Ella looked up, her face draining of color. "Come in," she called, her voice trembling. The door opened, and a young woman stepped in, her face pale and anxious. "Ella, I need to talk to you." Ella's gaze softened, and she stood up, walking over to the woman. "Sarah, what's wrong?" The woman looked at me, then back at Ella, her eyes filled with concern. "I'm here because I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant, Ella. And the baby is yours." The room fell silent. I felt my heart skip a beat. This was the twist I hadn't anticipated. Ella's face went through a range of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something close to panic. "You're pregnant?" Ella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know how to tell you. I've been scared and confused, but I needed you to know." Ella took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she placed them on Sarah's shoulders. "I didn't know. I didn't know." I watched from my seat, feeling a mix of emotions. My initial reaction was anger and betrayal, but now there was something else, a strange mix of responsibility and concern. This child, innocent and unplanned, was caught in the middle of all this chaos. "Ella," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happens next. This child needs to have some stability, and we need to figure out how to handle this." Ella looked at me, her expression conflicted. I don't know if I can do this alone. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. You're not alone. We'll figure this out together. For the baby's sake. Ella nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I looked at Sarah, who was now sitting in a chair, her hands resting on her stomach. We'll need to talk about how to handle this, I said gently. But right now, let's focus on making sure you and the baby are taken care of. As the three of us began to discuss our next steps, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. I had set out to seek justice, to expose a wrongdoing, but now I was faced with a new reality. The child Ella was carrying was a link between our lives, and it was up to us to navigate this new chapter with care and responsibility. By the end of our meeting, we had outlined a tentative plan for co-parenting. We agreed to work together to ensure that the baby would have a stable and supportive environment. It was not going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but for the sake of the child, we needed to find a way to make it work. As I left the salon, the evening sky painted in hues of orange and pink, I felt a strange sense of resolution. The anger and betrayal had not disappeared, but there was a new focus. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I was committed to doing right by the child, no matter the personal cost.